Sarah Matthews stood in the sterile conference room at Fort Bragg, her dress uniform crisp and decorated with ribbons that told stories most people would never understand. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as three stern-faced officers sat across from her, their expressions carved from stone. She had been summoned without explanation, pulled from her duties with a terse message that made her stomach drop. The middle officer, Colonel Davidson, slid a manila folder across the table. His gray eyes were cold, almost accusing. Sarah recognized that look. She had seen it before in the faces of men who believed women had no place in their world, especially not in the shadowy corners of special operations where she had spent the last 8 years of her life. "Lieutenant Matthews," Davidson began, his voice flat and official, "we've received allegations regarding your conduct during Operation Silent Thunder in Afghanistan. Multiple sources claim you violated protocol, endangered your team, and falsified reports to cover your actions." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained perfectly calm. Years of training had taught her to control every micro-expression, every tell that might reveal her true feelings. She knew this game. She had played it 1,000 times in hostile territories, across interrogation tables in dusty compounds, and in the corridors of power where her presence was constantly questioned. "With all due respect, sir, those allegations are false," she said, her voice steady and clear. Colonel Davidson's jaw tightened. He opened the folder and began reading from a document. "You allegedly abandoned your post to pursue a personal vendetta. You put civilian lives at risk. You acted without authorization from your commanding officer." Each accusation felt like a physical blow, but Sarah knew the truth. Operation Silent Thunder had been a success because of her actions, not despite them. She had made split-second decisions that saved lives, uncovered a trafficking network that spanned 3 countries, and brought home intelligence that prevented future attacks. But standing in this room facing these men who had never trusted her, she understood that the truth might not matter. The officer to Davidson's left, Major Richards, leaned forward. His voice carried a hint of something that made Sarah's skin crawl. "The investigation board has decided that pending the outcome of this inquiry, you will be placed on administrative leave. You are to surrender your uniform, your credentials, and all military identification immediately." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah had built her entire adult life around service. From the moment she enlisted at 18, running away from a home filled with secrets and pain, the military had been her salvation. The uniform had given her purpose, identity, and a way to channel the rage that burned inside her into something meaningful. "You want me to strip off my uniform?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Here now?" Davidson nodded slowly. "That's correct, Lieutenant. Or should I say, Ms. Matthews, until this investigation is complete, you have no right to wear that uniform." The third officer, a woman named Captain Reeves, looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Sarah had seen her before, knew she had never served in combat, never understood what it meant to live in the gray areas where black and white ceased to exist. Reeves represented everything Sarah had fought against, a paper pusher who judged warriors from the safety of her desk. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She began unbuttoning her jacket, each button feeling like she was dismantling a piece of herself. The ribbons on her chest represented classified missions she could never discuss, sacrifices she had made that would never be publicly acknowledged, and wounds that went far deeper than flesh. As she removed her jacket, she noticed Major Richards staring at her with an expression that made her blood run cold. There was satisfaction in his eyes, a cruel pleasure in watching her brought low. She recognized him then, placed his face in her memory. He had been at a joint briefing 3 years ago, had made comments about women in special operations that had earned him a formal reprimand. This was personal for him, a chance to prove his beliefs right. Sarah folded her jacket carefully and placed it on the table. Her hands moved to her shirt buttons and she began to unbutton them with the same mechanical precision. The room was silent except for the hum of the lights and the distant sound of soldiers training outside. She thought about the irony of it all. She had stripped down in far worse conditions, in muddy safe houses and bombed-out buildings, changing quickly between civilian clothes and tactical gear. But this felt different. This felt like they were stripping away her dignity, her honor, everything she had earned through blood and sacrifice. When her shirt was unbuttoned, she slipped it off her shoulders, Underneath, she wore a standard-issue undershirt. But as the fabric of her outer shirt fell away, something happened that no one in the room expected. Major Richards had been leaning forward, his eyes hungry for her humiliation. But as Sarah's arms became visible, his expression changed. The satisfaction drained from his face, replaced by something that looked like shock, then confusion, and finally, a flicker of recognition that he clearly wished he didn't have. Sarah's arms were covered in scars. Not the simple scars of training accidents or combat wounds that could be easily explained. These were different. They formed patterns, deliberate marks that told a story to those who knew how to read them. Burn marks in specific configurations, thin white lines that intersected at precise angles, small circular scars that dotted her skin like a terrible constellation. Captain Reeves gasped audibly, her hand moving to her mouth. Even Colonel Davidson's stony expression cracked, his eyes widening as he processed what he was seeing. But it was Major Richards whose reaction was most telling. He had gone pale, and his hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Sarah stood there, her shirt in her hands, watching their faces change. She knew exactly what they were seeing. She knew because these scars were a language, a brutal alphabet that marked her as something more than just another soldier. These scars told a story of her service that went beyond official records, beyond classified files, beyond anything that could be captured in a mission report. Colonel Davidson found his voice first. "Lieutenant Matthews," he said, and this time there was uncertainty in his tone. "Those marks, are they?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "Yes, sir. They are exactly what you think they are." Her voice was calm, but underneath there was steel. "They're from operations that don't officially exist, from missions that will never appear in any file you have clearance to see, from interrogations where I wasn't the one asking questions." The silence in the room stretched like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Major Richards pushed his chair back slightly, creating distance between himself and the table. His face had gone from pale to almost gray, and Sarah could see the rapid calculation happening behind his eyes. He was trying to figure out how badly he had miscalculated, how serious his mistake might be. Sarah remained standing, her shirt still in her hands, her scarred arms exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. She wasn't trying to intimidate them, not exactly, but she also wasn't going to hide what she had endured in service to her country. These scars were her truth, and if they wanted to strip away her uniform, they would have to face everything that came with it. Colonel Davidson cleared his throat, recovering some of his composure, though his voice had lost its earlier edge. "Lieutenant, perhaps we should pause this proceeding. There seem to be aspects of your service record that require clarification before we continue." Sarah allowed herself a small, humorless smile. "Aspects of my service record, sir? Is that what we're calling them now?" She carefully put her shirt back on, buttoning it with steady fingers. "I've been wondering when someone would finally notice, when someone would ask the right questions." Captain Reeves was staring at Sarah with something that looked like horror mixed with dawning realization. "The gaps in your deployment records," she said softly. "The months where you just disappear from official documentation. I flagged them during the preliminary review, but I was told they were administrative errors." "They weren't errors, Captain," Sarah said, adjusting her collar. "They were cover, deep cover. The kind of missions that don't get written down because acknowledging them would mean admitting to operations that violate about a dozen international treaties." Major Richards found his voice, though it came out strained. "You're claiming you were part of SEAL operations? Women aren't officially allowed in those units. It's policy." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Officially, you're absolutely right, Major. Officially, I was never there. Officially, those missions never happened. Officially, the intelligence we gathered about terrorist networks in Pakistan and Yemen and half a dozen other countries just materialized out of thin air." She paused, fixing him with a hard stare. "But unofficially? Unofficially, they needed someone who could get close to targets that male operators couldn't touch. Someone who could blend in, who could endure interrogation if captured, who could be completely deniable if things went wrong." The room fell silent again. Davidson was studying Sarah with new eyes, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the young lieutenant standing before him. He reached for the folder again, but this time his movements were hesitant, uncertain. "These allegations from Operation Silent Thunder," he began carefully. "Perhaps you should tell us your version of events. The complete version." Sarah picked up her jacket but didn't put it on yet. Instead, she held it in her hands, feeling the weight of the ribbons and medals that adorned it. Each one represented a story, but only some of those stories were ones she could tell. Operation Silent Thunder was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission, Sarah began, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone who had given many debriefings. We were tracking a high-value target in Kandahar province. Intelligence suggested he was planning an attack on civilian contractors in Kabul. My job was to provide linguistic support and cultural expertise. She paused, remembering the heat of that Afghan afternoon, the dust that got into everything, the constant awareness of danger that became as natural as breathing. But what intelligence didn't tell us was that our HVT wasn't just planning an attack. He was running a trafficking operation. Young girls, some as young as 8 or 9, being sold to fund terrorist operations. Captain Reeves's expression shifted from shock to something else, something that might have been understanding, or maybe respect. You went after them, she said quietly. You went after the girls. I made a decision in the field, Sarah confirmed. My commanding officer for that mission was focused on the primary target, but I saw an opportunity to do more than just gather intelligence. I saw a chance to actually stop something evil from happening. Her voice hardened. So yes, I acted without explicit authorization. Yes, I deviated from the mission parameters. And yes, I put myself at risk to extract those girls from a compound that was supposed to be outside our operational area. Major Richards was shaking his head slowly. That's not how operations work, Lieutenant. You can't just go rogue because you feel like playing hero. Chain of command exists for a reason. Protocol exists for a reason. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. You want to talk about protocol, Major? Let's talk about the protocol that says I was never supposed to exist in those units in the first place. Let's talk about the protocol that says my contributions can never be officially acknowledged because it would embarrass powerful people who didn't want women in combat. Let's talk about the protocol that allows trafficking networks to operate unchecked because stopping them doesn't fit neatly into someone's mission parameters. She took a step forward, and despite herself, Richards flinched. Those scars on my arms? I got some of them when I was captured in Yemen. I spent 72 hours in a basement while my captors tried to figure out if I was military, CIA, or just a really unlucky journalist. They used cigarettes, knives, and techniques that I'm not going to describe in this room. I didn't break because I couldn't break. If I had broken, it wouldn't have just meant my death. It would have meant exposing operations that protected American lives. Colonel Davidson held up a hand. Lieutenant Matthews, we're not trying to diminish your service or your sacrifice, but you understand why we're here. Multiple members of your team from Operation Silent Thunder filed complaints. They claim you acted recklessly, that you endangered the mission. They filed complaints because I made them look bad. Sarah shot back. Because a woman succeeded where they were content to follow orders blindly. Because I brought home not only the intelligence we needed, but also rescued 17 girls who would have disappeared into hell. Because my actions resulted in the capture of our HVT and dismantling of a network that spanned 3 countries. She paused, her chest heaving with emotion she usually kept buried. They filed complaints because they couldn't stand that I was better at the job than they were. The truth of her words hung in the air. Captain Reeves was nodding slowly as if pieces were finally falling into place. Davidson was studying the folder again, but his expression had changed completely from the beginning of this meeting. The burns on your arms, Davidson said carefully. The ones in the specific pattern. Those are recognition marks, aren't they? Used by certain classified units to identify their own in situations where standard identification isn't possible. Sarah nodded. They are. Each mark represents a successful mission completion. Each one was witnessed and verified by my handlers. Each one represents intelligence that saved American lives, even if those missions will never be acknowledged publicly. Major Richards was looking distinctly uncomfortable now, sweat beading on his forehead. He had clearly thought he was helping to take down an insubordinate female officer. Instead, he had stumbled into something far more complex, far more dangerous to his own career. If what you're saying is true, Richards said slowly, then this entire proceeding is built on incomplete information. We would need to access classified files that we might not have clearance for. Sarah fixed him with a cold stare. If what I'm saying is true, Major, are you suggesting I'm lying about my service? That I gave myself these scars for fun? That I invented months of my life just to excuse insubordination? That's not what I meant, Richards backtracked quickly. Then what did you mean? Sarah pressed. Major Richards opened his mouth to respond, but Colonel Davidson cut him off with a sharp gesture. The senior officer stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor in the tense silence. He walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where young soldiers ran through drills, their lives still simple, their choices still clear. I think, Davidson said carefully, that we need to make some phone calls before this proceeding continues. He turned back to face Sarah. Lieutenant Matthews, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Are you currently, or have you recently been under the operational command of any unit that requires executive-level clearance to acknowledge? Sarah met his gaze steadily. She had been waiting for this question, knew it would come eventually. The problem was that even answering it could violate operational security. But she was tired of the shadows, tired of the lies, tired of protecting people who were now trying to destroy her career. Sir, I cannot confirm or deny specific unit assignments without proper authorization codes, she said formally. However, I can tell you that there are individuals with the appropriate clearance who can verify every aspect of my service record, including the parts that don't officially exist. Davidson nodded slowly. Names? Admiral James Hawthorne, Naval Special Warfare Command. Colonel Marcus Webb, who I believe is currently stationed at MacDill Air Force Base. And someone you can call Director Chen, though getting his number will require going through channels that don't have building addresses. Sarah watched Davidson's expression change as she spoke each name. These weren't just random officers. These were people at the highest levels of special operations. People whose very involvement in a case like this would send shockwaves through the chain of command. Captain Reeves was frantically taking notes, her earlier discomfort replaced by what looked like fascination mixed with concern. She clearly understood that this situation had just escalated far beyond a simple disciplinary hearing. They were now treading in waters that could drown careers, could expose operations that were never meant to see light. You're saying, Major Richards said slowly, disbelief still evident in his voice, that an admiral and multiple colonels will vouch for secret operations that you conducted, while supposedly assigned to regular Army units. Sarah turned to him, and this time she didn't bother hiding the contempt in her expression. Major, with all due respect, you're out of your depth here. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. You thought you were investigating a problem lieutenant who didn't follow orders. Instead, you've opened a door to operations that people far above your pay grade decided needed to stay closed. The Major's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Are you threatening me, Lieutenant? I'm stating facts, Sarah replied coldly. You wanted me to strip off my uniform, to humiliate me, to prove that women don't belong in your military. But these scars tell a different story. They tell the story of a service that was so valuable, so critical that it had to be completely deniable. They tell the story of missions where failure would have meant not just my death, but the exposure of assets that took years to develop. She walked closer to the table, her movements deliberate and controlled. So no, Major, I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you that you've just tried to destroy the career of someone whose work you couldn't possibly understand, whose sacrifices you couldn't possibly appreciate, and whose existence officially challenges everything you believe about military service. The room fell silent. Outside, they could hear the rhythmic sound of soldiers chanting as they ran in formation. Normal military life continuing while inside this room, something far from normal was unfolding. Colonel Davidson returned to his seat, his expression grave. Lieutenant Matthews, I'm going to suspend this hearing pending verification of your claims. However, I need you to understand the position we're in. We have formal complaints from members of your team. We have reports that suggest insubordination and reckless behavior. We can't simply dismiss these because of claims about classified operations. I'm not asking you to dismiss them, Sarah said. I'm asking you to investigate them properly. Talk to the people who were actually there, not just the ones who filed complaints because their egos were bruised. Look at the results of Operation Silent Thunder. 17 girls rescued. A major trafficking network disrupted, high-value target captured. That's not recklessness, Colonel. That's mission success that exceeded every objective. Captain Reeves spoke up, her voice thoughtful. The complaints focus on Lieutenant Matthews acting without authorization and putting the team at risk. But the after-action report shows 0 casualties on our side and significant intelligence gains. If her actions were truly reckless, we should have seen a different outcome. Sarah nodded at Reeves, acknowledging the support. The truth is that some members of the team didn't like taking orders from a woman, especially when those orders came in the field and deviated from the original plan. They didn't like that I saw an opportunity they missed, and they especially didn't like that when we got back, my actions were quietly commended by people they've never met, operating in channels they don't have access to. Quietly commended? Davidson raised an eyebrow. By whom? By the same people whose names I just gave you, Sarah replied. The ones who understand that sometimes the mission on paper isn't the most important mission in the field. The ones who know that intelligence gathering isn't always about following a script. It's about seeing opportunities and having the courage and training to act on them. Major Richards was looking increasingly uncomfortable, as if he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. If all this is true, then why didn't anyone mention these classified operations during the initial investigation? Why let it get this far? Sarah's smile was bitter. Because, Major, the whole point of deniable operations is that they're deniable. The people who run these programs don't jump in to save individual operators unless absolutely necessary. We're assets, not people. We're tools that get used and then put back in the box. The expectation is that we'll handle our own problems, maintain our own covers, protect the program at all costs. She paused, looking down at her hands, at the scars that disappeared under her sleeves. They were probably waiting to see if I would break operational security to defend myself. If I had pulled the classified card too early, started naming names and operations right away, I would have failed a test. I would have proven that I couldn't be trusted to keep secrets under pressure. Davidson's expression showed he understood the catch-22. So by letting this hearing proceed, by making you strip off your uniform, we forced you into a position where you had to choose between your career and operational security. That's exactly right, sir, Sarah confirmed. And I chose my career, which means I probably just ended it anyway. The moment I gave you those names, the moment I confirmed that there are aspects of my service that require special clearance to discuss, I became a liability. People in those programs don't like liabilities. The weight of her words settled over the room. Captain Reeves looked genuinely distressed, as if she was beginning to understand that they had all been pawns in a much larger game. Davidson's face had gone hard again, but this time the hardness seemed directed inward, at himself and the system he represented. What do you want, Lieutenant? Davidson asked finally. What would constitute a fair outcome from your perspective? Sarah considered the question carefully. What did she want? Vindication, justice, recognition for sacrifices that could never be publicly acknowledged? She looked at each of the officers in turn, seeing them clearly now, understanding their roles in this drama. I want the truth, she said finally. I want a full investigation that includes testimony from everyone involved in Operation Silent Thunder, not just the complainants. I want someone with appropriate clearance to review my complete service record, including the parts that don't appear in standard files. And I want these proceedings to be conducted by people who actually understand the nature of special operations, not by officers whose only exposure to combat is through reports and briefings. She picked up her jacket from the table. And I want you to understand something, all of you. I didn't ask for these scars. I didn't volunteer for missions where capture meant torture and death. I didn't choose to become someone whose existence had to be denied for operational security. But I did my job, and I did it better than anyone expected. So if you're going to judge me, if you're going to strip away my uniform and my dignity, at least have the courage to look at the whole picture. 3 days passed before Sarah heard anything. 3 days of being confined to her quarters, stripped of her duties, existing in a strange limbo where she was neither officially suspended nor fully cleared. She spent the time working out, running until her legs burned and her lungs screamed, trying to quiet the voices in her head that told her she had made a terrible mistake. On the 4th day, she was summoned again. Not to the same conference room, but to a different building entirely, one she had only visited once before, years ago, when she had first been recruited for operations that didn't officially exist. The building had no name, no obvious purpose, just a number and a guard station that required multiple levels of clearance to pass. The guard checked her ID 3 times before letting her through. She walked down a long corridor, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor until she reached an unmarked door. She knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. The room was different from the one where her humiliation had begun. This was someone's office, comfortable and lived in, with photos on the wall showing military operations from decades past. Behind the desk sat a man she recognized immediately, Admiral James Hawthorne, one of the names she had given to Colonel Davidson. He looked older than his photos, his hair more gray than she remembered, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "Lieutenant Matthews," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." Sarah sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago never to show nervousness, never to reveal anything that could be used against her. Hawthorne studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You caused quite a stir," he said finally. Colonel Davidson nearly had a heart attack when he started making calls and realized what he had stumbled into. Major Richards, on the other hand, is currently being reassigned to a desk job in Alaska. Seems he has a history of inappropriate behavior that somehow got overlooked until now. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, sir. Didn't you?" Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. "You could have played this differently. Could have kept your mouth shut, taken the suspension, let it blow over quietly. Instead, you threw gasoline on the fire. You named names, exposed operations, forced our hand." He paused. "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah took a moment to formulate her answer, understanding that what she said next could determine the rest of her life. "Because I'm tired of being invisible," she said finally. "I'm tired of doing the work and letting others take credit. I'm tired of having my existence denied, my contributions erased, my sacrifices dismissed. I'm tired of being a ghost." Hawthorne nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "Being a ghost is what keeps you alive in our line of work. Visibility means vulnerability. The moment you become known, you become useless for the kind of operations we conduct." "Then maybe it's time for a change," Sarah replied. "Maybe it's time to acknowledge that women can serve in these capacities without the sky falling. Maybe it's time to stop pretending that half the population is incapable of the same sacrifices and accomplishments as the other half." The Admiral leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You sound like someone who's about to walk away, someone who's done with the game." Sarah met his gaze. "Am I wrong?" "That depends," Hawthorne said, "on what you want to happen next, on whether you're willing to accept the consequences of your choices. You see, Lieutenant, the problem isn't that you revealed classified operations. We can handle that. The problem is that you've become a symbol, a lightning rod. People are asking questions we'd rather not answer. Women in special operations, officially or otherwise. The ethics of deniable assets. The line between following orders and following conscience." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at something Sarah couldn't see. "Operation Silent Thunder was a success by every metric that matters. The girls you rescued are safe. The trafficking network was disrupted. Intelligence you gathered prevented 3 separate attacks. But success isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes people need someone to blame, someone to punish, to maintain the illusion of control and order." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying I'm going to be that someone? The scapegoat?" "I'm saying," Hawthorne turned back to face her, "that you have a choice to make. We can make this all go away. The complaints, the investigation, the questions about your service, we can bury it so deep that it never happened. You go back to your regular duties, maybe get transferred somewhere less complicated. Live out your career in relative peace." "And the cost?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "You never speak of the classified operations again. You accept that your service will remain unacknowledged. You become invisible again, a ghost serving in the shadows." Hawthorne paused. "Or we can do something different. We can acknowledge your service, at least partially. We can use you as an example, a pioneer. We can start the process of officially integrating women into special operations units." Sarah's heart leapt at the possibility. This was what she had dreamed of, what she had fought for. But Hawthorne's expression told her there was a catch. "But if we do that," he continued, "your career as an operator is over. You become a public figure, a spokesperson, a symbol. You'll never run another mission. You'll never feel that adrenaline, that sense of purpose that comes from operating in the field. You'll trade action for politics, missions for press conferences, real work for symbolic gestures." The choice was clear, and it was cruel. Sarah could remain a ghost, continuing to do the work she loved but never receiving recognition for it. Or she could step into the light, achieve acknowledgement and possibly help other women, but lose the very thing that had given her life meaning. "There's a third option," Sarah said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. "What if I don't have to choose? What if we acknowledge past service while allowing space for future operations? What if the next generation of female operators doesn't have to be invisible? Hawthorne smiled, but it was a sad smile. You're talking about changing the entire culture of special operations. That's not something that happens overnight. Maybe not, Sarah agreed, but it has to start somewhere. Why not with me? Why not use this moment, this controversy, to open doors that have been closed for too long? The Admiral returned to his desk and pulled out a folder, different from the one Colonel Davidson had shown her, but somehow more ominous. He slid it across to Sarah. This is a proposal, he said. A new program, experimental, that would officially integrate women into special operations training and deployment. It would need a commander, someone with field experience, someone who understands both the capabilities and challenges involved, someone who's already proven themselves in circumstances that would break most people. Sarah opened the folder, scanning the contents quickly. It was everything she had imagined and more. A complete restructuring of how special operations could work, how they could be more inclusive without sacrificing effectiveness. But it would also mean becoming an administrator, a leader, rather than an operator. You want me to train others instead of operating myself, she said. I want you to build something lasting, Hawthorne corrected. Your operational career has maybe 5 more years if you're lucky. Your body will give out, or your luck will run out, or you'll make one mistake too many. But this, he tapped the folder, this could be your legacy. Women serving openly in special operations, trained by someone who understands exactly what they'll face, someone who can prepare them for both the missions and the politics. Sarah closed the folder slowly, her mind racing. It was a generous offer, an opportunity to make real change, but it would mean walking away from the life she had known, the identity she had built through years of sacrifice and struggle. What about the investigation? She asked. The complaints from Operation Silent Thunder? Dropped, Hawthorne said simply. Colonel Davidson has been read in on the relevant aspects of your service. He understands now what actually happened. The complainants are being transferred, and their files will reflect their inability to adapt to changing operational realities. His expression hardened slightly. They won't trouble you again. Sarah left Admiral Hawthorne's office with the folder under her arm and a decision weighing on her heart. She walked through the corridors of the nameless building, past guards who looked through her rather than at her. A ghost in a place designed for ghosts. The late afternoon sun hit her face as she stepped outside, and she stood there for a moment, breathing in air that tasted like freedom and uncertainty in equal measure. She had 48 hours to make her decision. 48 hours to choose between remaining an operator or becoming something else entirely. Something that might matter more, but would feel less like living. She walked across the base, not really heading anywhere specific, just moving because staying still felt impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Captain Reeves, brief and formal, asking if Sarah would meet her for coffee. Sarah almost declined, then changed her mind. Maybe talking to someone outside the chain of command, someone who had witnessed her humiliation and hadn't looked away, would help clear her thoughts. They met at a small cafe off base, the kind of place where soldiers went to pretend they were normal people for an hour or two. Reeves was already there, sitting in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee on the table. She stood when Sarah approached, and there was something in her expression that looked like respect, maybe even admiration. "Thank you for coming," Reeves said as they sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." Sarah picked up her coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "I wasn't sure either, but I figured you probably had a reason for reaching out." Reeves nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to apologize. I was part of that hearing, part of what they tried to do to you. I didn't speak up, didn't question what was happening until it was too late." "You're not responsible for Major Richard's prejudices or Colonel Davidson's assumptions," Sarah said. "You were doing your job, was I?" Reeves asked. "Because part of my job should have been recognizing when something wasn't right. Those gaps in your record, the inconsistencies in the timeline, the way certain reports were redacted beyond standard classification levels. I saw the signs, but I didn't want to see them. It was easier to treat you like just another case file." Sarah studied the other woman across the table. Reeves was younger than her, probably hadn't seen combat, had likely spent her entire career in administrative roles. But there was genuine remorse in her eyes, and that counted for something. "What changed?" Sarah asked. "Seeing your scars," Reeves said quietly. "Understanding what they meant. Realizing that while I've been pushing papers and checking boxes, People like you have been out there doing things I can't even imagine. It made me feel small. It made me realize how little I actually understand about the service I'm supposedly supporting. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, considering her response. You shouldn't feel small. The military needs people like you too. People who understand regulations and procedures, who keep the machine running. Not everyone can be an operator, and not everyone should be. But I should have been more aware, Reeves insisted. I should have questioned why a lieutenant with your record was facing a disciplinary hearing over what amounted to mission success. I should have pushed harder when things didn't add up. And if you had? Sarah asked. What would have happened? You would have been told to mind your own business, to stay in your lane. You might have ended up with your own career in jeopardy. She shook her head. The system isn't designed to reward people who ask inconvenient questions. Reeves leaned forward, her voice dropping. Is that why you're thinking about leaving? Because I've heard rumors. People are saying you've been offered something, a choice about your future. Sarah wasn't surprised that word had gotten out. Nothing stayed secret for long in the military, especially when it involved people at Admiral Hawthorne's level. I've been offered an opportunity to help change things, to make it so the next generation of women operators doesn't have to be invisible, doesn't have to endure what I've endured. That sounds like a good thing, Reeves said carefully. So why do you look like someone at a funeral? Sarah smiled despite herself. Because it means giving up the only life I've known. It means trading action for administration, missions for meetings, real work for politics and image management. It means becoming a symbol instead of a soldier. But it also means making a difference, Reeves pointed out. It means using your experience to open doors for others. How many women are out there right now, capable of doing what you've done but never getting the chance because the doors are closed? Sarah thought about this. She thought about the young woman she had been at 18, running away from a broken home, looking for purpose and finding it in uniform. She thought about the years of training, the missions that had pushed her to her limits and beyond, the sacrifices she had made that no one would ever know about. And she thought about the women who would come after her, who might have easier paths if she chose to build them. When I was captured in Yemen, Sarah said slowly, I was held in a basement for 3 days. They didn't know who I was, what I was doing there. They just knew I was American, and that was enough reason to hurt me. On the second day, one of my captors, a young guy, maybe 20, asked me why an American woman would come to his country. He said I must be crazy or stupid or both. She paused, remembering the dim light, the smell of blood and fear, the young man's face as he asked his question. I told him I came because there were people who needed help, because evil existed and someone had to stand against it. He laughed at me, called me a fool. But then late on the third day, just before my team extracted me, he came back. He brought me water, cleaned some of my wounds. He said his sister had been taken by traffickers years ago, that she had never been found. He said maybe I wasn't crazy after all. Reeves was listening intently, her coffee forgotten. What happened to him? I don't know, Sarah admitted. When the extraction team came, there was gunfire. People died. Maybe he was one of them, maybe not. But I think about him sometimes. I think about how we're all just people, caught up in systems and beliefs and circumstances beyond our control, and I wonder if the work I do makes any difference at all. Of course it makes a difference, Reeves said firmly. You saved 17 girls in Afghanistan. You've gathered intelligence that prevented attacks. You've risked your life countless times for people you'll never meet, who'll never know your name. How can that not matter? But at what cost? Sarah asked. I have no family, no real friends outside the service. I have scars inside and out. I have nightmares about missions I can't talk about, trauma I can't process with normal therapists. I've given everything to this work, and now they're asking me to give even more by walking away from it. Reeves reached across the table, hesitating for just a moment before placing her hand over Sarah's. Maybe you've already given enough. Maybe it's time to let others carry the burden. That doesn't make you weak or selfish. It makes you human. Sarah looked down at their hands, surprised by the gesture, surprised by how much she needed the human contact. She had spent so long being hard, being strong, being untouchable, that she had almost forgotten what simple kindness felt like. The program they want me to lead, Sarah said. It's not just about training. It's about changing culture, challenging assumptions, proving that women can excel in roles they've been excluded from. It's about being visible when I've spent my entire career being invisible. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I even want to. Can I tell you something? Reeves asked. When I first saw you in that hearing room, I thought you were just another arrogant soldier who thought the rules didn't apply to them. But when you started unbuttoning your uniform, when those scars became visible, everything changed. Not just for me, but for Colonel Davidson, even for Major Richards. In that moment, you made us see the cost of service in a way we never had before. You made us understand what sacrifice really means. She squeezed Sarah's hand gently. If you can do that in a hearing room with just your scars, imagine what you could do with a platform, with authority, with the ability to shape policy and training. You could make it so that no one else has to be invisible. You could make it so that service is acknowledged, sacrifice is honored, and women are seen as the warriors they are. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a wall she had built around herself beginning to crack. Reeves was right in a way. She had spent so long thinking about what she would lose by accepting the program that she hadn't fully considered what others might gain. There's a girl, Sarah said quietly. One of the ones we rescued in Afghanistan. Her name is Amina. She was 14, had been sold by her uncle to pay a debt. When we found her, she was terrified, convinced we were just different men who would hurt her in different ways. But I talked to her in her own language, told her we were there to help, that she was going to be safe. Sarah paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. When we got her to safety, she grabbed my hand and asked me how I became strong enough to fight the bad men. She asked if she could become strong like me someday. I didn't know what to tell her. I didn't know if strength like mine was something anyone should aspire to, given what it cost me to develop it. What did you tell her? Reeves asked softly. I told her that strength comes in many forms, and that the strongest thing she could do was survive. Sarah stood outside Admiral Hawthorne's office again, the folder tucked under her arm, her decision made. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind of reflection, doubt, and ultimately clarity. She had walked the base at night, remembering every mission that had brought her to this moment, every scar that told a story of survival and sacrifice. She had thought about Amina and the 16 other girls they had rescued, about the young man in Yemen who had shown her unexpected kindness, about all the people her invisible service had protected. She knocked once and entered. Hawthorne looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable as always, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he already knew what she was going to say. Admiral, Sarah said, standing at attention, I've made my decision regarding the program. Hawthorne gestured for her to sit, but Sarah remained standing. This felt like something that needed to be said on her feet, like a statement of purpose rather than a conversation. I accept, she said. I'll take command of the new program. I'll help build a path for women in special operations. But I have conditions. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow, the closest thing to surprise she had ever seen from him. Conditions? You understand this is already a generous offer? I understand, sir. But if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to walk away from operational work and become the face of this change, then I need it to be real, not symbolic, not a publicity stunt that gets quietly shelved when the cameras stop rolling. Sarah's voice was firm, steady. I need guarantee that the program will have real resources, real authority, and real commitment from the highest levels of command. Hawthorne studied her for a long moment. What else? The women who go through this program need to be held to the same standards as men, no higher and no lower. I won't be part of something that sets them up to fail by making requirements impossible, and I won't be part of something that undermines their achievements by lowering the bar. Sarah paused. They need to earn their place through the same blood, sweat, and determination that every operator earns it, but they also need to be given the same opportunities, the same respect, the same recognition. Agreed, Hawthorne said simply. What else? The missions and operations I've been part of, the ones that officially don't exist, need to be properly documented in classified records. Not for public consumption, but for history. Future generations need to know that women were serving in these capacities long before it was officially acknowledged. My service and the service of any other women who've operated in the shadows needs to be preserved. Hawthorne nodded slowly. That can be arranged. There are archives for such things, repositories where the truth is kept even when it can't be publicly acknowledged. Your service will be recorded, your contributions noted for those with proper clearance to review. Sarah felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. "Then I accept, sir. I'll lead this program to the best of my ability." "Good," Hawthorne said, standing and extending his hand. Sarah shook it, feeling the weight of the commitment she had just made. "You'll report to Quantico in 2 weeks to begin setting up the training pipeline. You'll have a staff of your choosing, budget approval for necessary resources, and direct line authority to my office for any issues that arise." He walked around his desk, his expression becoming more serious. "But I need you to understand something, Lieutenant. Soon to be Commander Matthews. This won't be easy. You're going to face resistance from people who believe women have no place in special operations. You're going to deal with politics, with media scrutiny, with pressure from all sides. Some will want you to fail to prove their prejudices right. Others will expect you to succeed beyond all reasonable standards to justify your existence." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied. "I've been facing that my entire career. At least now I'll be doing it in uniform that I can wear openly." Hawthorne smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern face. "I believe you're going to change the military, Commander. I believe women like you are the future of special operations. But more than that, I believe you're going to give hope to people who thought service at the highest levels was forever closed to them." Sarah left his office feeling lighter than she had in years. Despite the enormous responsibility she had just accepted, she walked through the base with her head high, her uniform properly in place, her scars hidden beneath fabric but no longer hidden in shame or secrecy. Her phone buzzed. A message from Captain Reeves containing just 2 words and an emoji she wouldn't normally use but somehow felt appropriate. "You did it." Sarah smiled and typed back, "We did it. Thank you for helping me see clearly." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah prepared for her transition. She met with officials, reviewed program proposals, began assembling a team of instructors who believed in the mission. She also reached out to contacts in various units, quietly letting them know that opportunities were opening up, that women who had been serving in shadows or who had capabilities that were being wasted in traditional roles might soon have new options. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the military branches reached out, some sharing their own stories of unofficial operations, others expressing interest in training for roles they had been told were impossible. Each conversation reinforced Sarah's belief that she had made the right choice, that there was a hunger for change that had been suppressed too long. On her last day at Fort Bragg, Sarah packed up her quarters, carefully folding her uniforms and collecting the few personal items she had accumulated over the years. There was a knock at her door and she opened it to find Colonel Davidson standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Commander Matthews," he said formally, "I wanted to speak with you before you left." Sarah invited him in, curious about what he wanted to say. Davidson stood awkwardly in the small space, clearly struggling with whatever he had come to express. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I judged you without understanding the full scope of your service. I allowed personal biases and incomplete information to color my assessment. I participated in an attempt to humiliate and discredit you, and I was wrong." Sarah was surprised by his directness, by the genuine remorse in his voice. "You were doing your job as you understood it, Colonel. You didn't have access to the full picture." "That's not an excuse," Davidson said firmly. "I should have questioned more, should have recognized that something didn't add up. But more than that, I should have approached the entire situation with more respect, more benefit of the doubt." He paused. "When you revealed those scars, when I understood what they meant, I felt ashamed. Ashamed of myself, ashamed of a system that required your sacrifice to remain invisible, ashamed of my own prejudices that made me assume the worst." Sarah nodded, accepting his apology. "What matters now is what we do going forward, how we build something better." "I want to help," Davidson said, "with your program. I may not have the operational experience you do, but I have influence with the brass, connections that might be useful. I'd like to support this effort in whatever way I can, to make amends for my earlier mistakes and to be part of positive change." Sarah considered this offer. Davidson's support could indeed be valuable, his connections and institutional knowledge useful in navigating the politics of military bureaucracy. And more than that, his willingness to admit error and seek to make things right spoke to a character she could respect. "I'll take you up on that, Colonel," she said. "The program is going to need allies at all levels, people who understand both the traditional military culture and the need for evolution. You could be a bridge between the old guard and the new reality? Davidson's relief was visible. Thank you, Commander. I won't let you down. After he left, Sarah finished her packing and took one last look around the quarters that had been her home. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that scared 18-year-old running from a broken home to the woman she was now. Scarred but not broken, invisible but soon to be seen, ending one chapter to begin another. She picked up the folder Admiral Hawthorne had given her, the one containing the blueprint for the program that would be her legacy. Inside was a future where women could serve openly in special operations, where capability mattered more than gender, where sacrifice was acknowledged rather than hidden. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would be difficult, but it was real and it was possible. Sarah walked out of her quarters and across the base one final time, heading toward her car in the drive to Quantico. As she walked, she noticed other women in uniform, some looking at her with curiosity, others with something that might have been hope. She wondered how many of them had stories like hers, capabilities that were being wasted, potential that was being ignored. Soon, she thought, they would have their chance. Soon the doors would open wider. Soon the invisible would become visible and the impossible would become routine. The scars she carried, the sacrifices she had made, would mean something beyond her own service. They would become part of a larger story, a turning point in military history where women stepped fully into roles they had always been capable of filling. She reached